Elaine Washington wiped down the counter of her diner for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The small roadside place, Elaine's place, had been her life for the past 15 years. It sat on the edge of Bedford, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The evening rush had ended, leaving only a few regular customers drinking coffee as the rain got stronger outside. The bell over the door rang, and Elaine looked up to see a large man stumble in, soaking wet. His leather vest had the Hells Angels logo on it, clear to see even when wet. His long beard dripped water onto the floor as he walked to a corner table, falling into the seat more than sitting down. "You okay there?" Elaine called out, grabbing a towel and a menu. The biker, who she would later learn was named Frank Miller, looked up with tired eyes. "Just need a minute to catch my breath, ma'am, and maybe some coffee." Elaine poured him a hot cup, looking at him closely. There was a cut on his forehead, poorly hidden by his wet hair, and his knuckles were raw and bleeding. "Looks like you've had quite a night," she said, placing the coffee in front of him. Frank tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "You could say that. Got separated from my brothers when some local guys decided they didn't like our kind passing through." Before Elaine could answer, the diner's door opened again. 2 police officers came in, their uniforms as wet as Frank's, leather. Officer Pete Daniels and his partner, Officer Rick Johnson. Both men Elaine had known since they were boys stealing candy from old Mr. Patterson's store. "Evening, Elaine," Pete said, his tone casual, but his eyes fixed on Frank. "We're looking for a Hells Angel. There was trouble at Mac's bar, some property damage, a few people hurt." Elaine noticed how Frank's shoulders got tense, his hand gripping the coffee mug tighter. "Is that so?" Elaine leaned against the counter. "Well, I haven't seen any trouble in here tonight, just my regulars and folks getting out of the rain." "Officer," Johnson stepped forward, his hand resting too casually on his gun. "Elaine, we know he came in here. We're just doing our job." Elaine stood up straight, crossing her arms. At 52, she had seen enough of the world to know when something wasn't right. "And I'm just running my business, Rick. Unless you have a warrant or are looking for someone specific with proper identification, I'm going to have to ask you to either order something or leave. You're dripping all over my clean floor." The tension in the room was strong. The few remaining customers had gone quiet, watching with interest. Pete's eyes narrowed. "You protecting criminals now, Elaine?" "I'm protecting my right to serve whoever walks through that door without harassment," she replied calmly. "You know me better than that, Pete. If there was real trouble in here, I'd be the first to call you boys." The officers looked at each other, clearly thinking about what to do next. Finally, Pete nodded shortly. "We'll be back with proper paperwork if needed. But this isn't over." After they left, Elaine went back to Frank's table. He was staring at her with a mix of confusion and thanks. "Why did you do that?" he asked quietly. Elaine refilled his coffee cup. "Because in 15 years of running this place, I've learned to tell the difference between trouble and someone in trouble. Now drink your coffee and tell me what really happened tonight." As the rain kept pouring outside, Frank began his story, not knowing that this meeting would change Elaine's life forever. Frank sipped his coffee and took bites of the apple pie Elaine had insisted he try. "Best in the county," she'd said, and she wasn't wrong. The truth, as it often did, lay somewhere in the complicated middle. "I was at Mac's with a few of my brothers," Frank explained. "We're just passing through on our way to a memorial ride for one of our own who died last month. Cancer took him too young." Elaine nodded, giving him space to continue. "Some locals didn't like us being there. Words were exchanged, then pushes, then punches." He moved his raw knuckles. "I'm not proud of fighting, but I don't start fights I can't finish either." "And the property damage?" Elaine asked, remembering what Officer Pete had said. Frank sighed. "A table got turned over, some glasses broke. My brothers and I offered to pay for it all, but Mac called the cops anyway. When the sirens started, we split up. Not my proudest moment, but..." He stopped talking. "But you've had problems with small-town police before?" Elaine finished for him. "Yes, ma'am." Frank's eyes met hers. Doesn't matter that half our club are veterans or that we do charity runs for kids with cancer. They see the patch, they see trouble. Something in his words connected with Elaine. Growing up black in a mostly white town, she knew what it meant to be judged on appearance alone. I understand more than you might think, she said quietly. Finish your pie. You can wait out the rain here. As the night went on, more of Frank's story came out. He was 50 years old, a Vietnam veteran with 2 grown daughters and a grandson he loved. He showed Elaine pictures from his wallet, family photos and images of the club at various charity events. The Hells Angels patch meant brotherhood to him, a family he chose rather than was born into. By the time the rain stopped around midnight, Elaine had made a decision. She offered Frank the small room above the diner where she sometimes stayed during bad weather. It's not fancy, but it's dry and has a bed. You can leave in the morning when things have calmed down. Frank tried to refuse, but he was too tired to argue. I'll pay you back somehow, he promised as she showed him upstairs. Just get some rest, Elaine replied, and maybe tell your brothers that if they're ever passing through, Elaine's place serves a good breakfast. Little did she know how soon that invitation would be accepted, and by how many. The next morning started clear and crisp, the kind of fall day that makes even a small town like Bedford seem perfect. Elaine arrived at the diner at 5 a.m. as she did every day, starting the coffee and getting ready for the breakfast rush. Frank came downstairs around 6, looking better than he had the night before, though the cut on his forehead had a big bruise around it now. Morning, he said somewhat shyly. Thank you again for everything. Elaine waved away his thanks, pushing a plate of eggs, bacon, and hash browns toward him. Eat, then we'll figure out how to get you back to your people without another run-in with Pete and Rick. They were talking about how Frank could leave safely when the bell above the door rang. Elaine turned, ready with a smile for customers, only to freeze when officers Pete and Rick walked in with Chief Bill Gregory. Morning, Elaine, Chief Gregory said, his voice neutral, but his eyes sharp. Unlike his younger officers, the chief had decades of experience and a reputation for fairness that had earned him respect throughout Bedford. Chief, Elaine said with a nod. Coffee? Please. He sat on a stool at the counter while Pete and Rick stayed standing, their eyes fixed on Frank. The chief took a sip of coffee before speaking. I heard about last night's misunderstanding. Pete moved impatiently. Chief, that's the Hells Angel from Max. Chief Gregory held up a hand, silencing his officer without even looking at him. I've spoken with Mac this morning. Seems the situation was not as bad as the initial report. Frank sat up straighter, surprise clear on his face. Max says the damage was small, and one of your friends already paid in full before leaving, the chief continued, now speaking directly to Frank. He's not pressing charges. Relief showed on Frank's face, but it didn't last long. The chief's next words came with a pointed look at Elaine. However, hiding someone avoiding police questioning isn't something I can ignore, Elaine. You've built a good business here. Would be ashamed to see trouble come to it. The warning was clear, and it made Elaine angry. She'd known Bill Gregory for 20 years, had even provided food for his daughter's wedding for free when money was tight for his family. Are you threatening my business, Bill? She asked, her voice steady despite her anger. The chief looked uncomfortable. Not threatening. Warning. Bedford is a peaceful town. We like to keep it that way. By scaring business owners? Or by judging people based on what they wear? Elaine challenged. A tense silence fell. Even the few early morning customers seemed to hold their breath. Finally, Chief Gregory put down his coffee cup. No charges being filed means you're free to go, he told Frank. But I'd suggest you move along quickly. Bedford isn't much for motorcycle clubs. After the police left, Frank turned to Elaine, worry on his weathered face. I didn't mean to bring trouble to you. Elaine scoffed, her movements sharp with anger as she wiped the counter. That wasn't about you. Well, not entirely. She sighed, some of the fight leaving her. Bill's been trying to clean up this part of town for years. He thinks my diner brings the wrong kind of people through Bedford. Because you serve everyone? Frank asked. Because I serve everyone equally, Elaine corrected. In their minds, there's a difference. Frank nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. He reached for his wallet, but Elaine shook her head. Your money's no good here today, she insisted. Just get back to your people safely. Frank looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple black text on white cardstock. Frank Miller, mechanic, with a phone number. If you ever need anything at all, you call that number, he said, placing it on the counter. Hell's Angels repay their debts. Elaine took the card, putting it into her apron pocket with a small smile. Safe travels, Frank. As she watched him get on his motorcycle and disappear down the highway, she wondered if she'd ever see him again. The thought was brief, pushed aside as she turned back to the growing breakfast crowd. But the chief's warning stayed with her, a shadow over what should have been a normal day. Over the next 24 hours, Elaine noticed small changes in her business. Regular customers who'd been coming in for years suddenly had excuses for why they couldn't stay. Delivery trucks that normally arrived right on time were running behind schedule. Even her morning waitress, Donna Clark, seemed nervous, constantly looking out the windows as if expecting trouble. By closing time, Elaine knew something was wrong. The day's money was half what it should have been for a Wednesday. You gonna be okay, Miss Elaine? Donna asked as she hung up her apron. The young woman had worked at the diner since high school, paying her way through community college with the tips she earned. Of course I am, Elaine assured her with more confidence than she felt. Just a slow day. But as she closed up alone, counting the small day's earnings, worry grew inside her. The diner was more than a business. It was her legacy, the thing she'd built from nothing after her husband Joe died. It had paid for her son's college and stood as proof that a black woman could succeed in a town where success wasn't always equally available to everyone. Thursday morning brought more of the same. By noon, the diner sat nearly empty during what should have been the lunch rush. Elaine was cleaning an already clean table when the bell rang and she looked up to see Mayor Sam Lewis enter. Elaine, he greeted her with the politician's smile she'd always distrusted. Got a minute to talk? They sat at the counter, Sam refusing even coffee. I'll get right to it, he said, folding his hands. There's been some concern about the type of people your place is bringing to our town. Elaine raised an eyebrow. One motorcycle rider passing through counts as type of people now? You know it's more than that, Sam replied smoothly. Bedford is developing. The new highway bypass will bring tourists business. The town council has a vision for this area, and frankly, Elaine's place might not fit that vision. His meaning couldn't have been clearer if he'd spelled it out. Are you suggesting I sell? Elaine asked in disbelief. Sam spread his hands in a gesture of fake generosity. The town would be willing to offer a fair price, more than fair considering the current slowdown in business you seem to be having. Get out, Elaine said quietly. Excuse me? Get out of my diner. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes flashed with years of built-up defiance. Unless you're ordering food, you're taking up valuable counter space. The mayor's face hardened. Don't be foolish, Elaine. This offer won't stay open forever. Maybe you should talk about it with your son. I'm sure Greg would want what's best for your future. The mention of her son, her weakness turned into a weapon against her, was the final straw. My future is my business, Elaine stated firmly. And this diner isn't for sale, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Now are you ordering something or are you leaving? After the mayor stormed out, Elaine allowed herself one shaky breath before straightening her shoulders. She'd faced worse than small-town politics before. But as the empty afternoon stretched before her, she wondered how long she could hold out against this kind of pressure. The answer came from an unexpected source. At precisely 4:53 p.m., as Elaine was thinking about closing early for the first time in 15 years, she heard it. The special rumble of motorcycles. Not one or two, but many. The sound grew louder until it seemed to surround the diner completely. Donna, who'd arrived for the evening shift, looked out the window and gasped, Miss Elaine, you better come see this. Elaine stepped outside onto the small porch of her diner and felt her jaw drop. The parking lot, the street, and even the field next door were filled with motorcycles, hundreds of them. Men and women, in leather vests with the Hells Angels logo, were getting off their bikes, removing helmets, stretching after what must have been a long ride. And there, at the front, grinning widely, stood Frank Miller. "Told you Hells Angels repay their debts," he called out to her. "Hope you've got enough coffee and pie. My brothers and sisters are mighty hungry after the ride from 3 states over." As the bikers began walking toward the diner, Elaine felt a laugh bubble up from deep inside her, the first real laugh she'd had in days. "Well," she said to Donna, who stood wide-eyed beside her, "looks like we might need to call in some help. Get Cal on the phone. Tell him to bring all the supplies he can fit in his truck." Within minutes, the quiet diner transformed into the busiest place in Bedford. Bikers filled every seat, stood along the walls, and spilled out onto the porch. The griddle sizzled nonstop as Elaine and Cal worked side by side, cooking more food than they had in the past week combined. Donna moved through the crowd with a new confidence, taking orders and delivering plates. Even Elaine's son Greg, who'd driven 2 hours from the city after her worried call, rolled up his sleeves and jumped in to help with the dishes. Frank sat at the counter, watching with clear satisfaction. "Not bad for a last-minute gathering," he commented when Elaine finally had a moment to breathe. "Last minute?" She laughed, wiping sweat from her brow. 200 bikers don't just appear out of nowhere, Frank." He shrugged, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I made some calls. Turns out a lot of clubs owe me favors. And a lot of bikers appreciate a place where they're treated like human beings first, patches second." The bell over the door jingled constantly as more people arrived. Not just bikers now, but locals too. Neighbors who'd never set foot in her diner before, curious about all the noise. Regulars who had been noticeably missing the past 2 days, now sheepishly making their way through the crowd. Word had spread through Bedford like wildfire. Something special was happening at Elaine's place. Around 8 p.m. the bell jingled once more, and Chief Gregory walked in. The diner didn't exactly go quiet, but the energy shifted, conversations lowering as eyes followed the police chief's movement. Frank straightened on his stool, and several other Hells Angels moved slightly closer to Elaine. The chief looked around, at the packed diner, then at Elaine. "Quite a crowd you've got tonight." "Yes," she agreed simply. "Turns out there's a lot of hungry people passing through Bedford, so I see." His eyes scanned the room, taking in the patches, the leather, the tattoos, and also the families with children who'd arrived, the local farmers still in their work clothes, the teenagers from the high school taking pictures with friendly bikers. It was a mix of people that couldn't be easily labeled. "You know," the chief said finally, "in 30 years of police work, I've learned that trouble usually announces itself pretty clearly." He paused, looking directly at Frank now. "And this doesn't look like trouble to me. It looks like good business." Elaine felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "Was there something you needed, Chief?" "Just dinner, if you can manage to feed one more." As the night went on, something remarkable happened. The lines that had seemed so rigid began to fade. Local teenagers sat with bikers, listening to road stories with wide eyes. Bedford's hardware store owner found himself in deep conversation with a Hells Angel who'd once been a building contractor. Chief Gregory ended up sharing a table with 3 riders who turned out to be fellow Vietnam veterans. Mayor Sam Lewis appeared around 10 p.m., his face a mask of barely hidden fury as he surveyed the scene. He caught Elaine's eye across the room but said nothing before leaving quickly. "He won't be bothering you again," Frank assured her as they watched the mayor's retreating back. "No?" Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Let's just say we've made it clear that Elaine's place has friends, lots of friends from many walks of life who appreciate what you've built here." Frank gestured to the diverse crowd. "This isn't just about bikers or locals. It's about standing up for spaces where people can just be people." The gathering continued well into the night, eventually turning into something like a block party, as tables were moved outside to fit the growing crowd. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else set up a small dance floor. By dawn, as the last of the visitors left and the cleanup began, Elaine sat with Frank on the porch steps, watching the sunrise. "You know they'll be back," Frank said. "Not just the officials and their pressure tactics, my people too." Elaine nodded, tired but content. I'm counting on it. In fact, she hesitated, then continued. I've been thinking about expanding. The lot next door has been empty for years. Might make a good space for events, maybe even overnight parking for travelers. Frank chuckled. Elaine Washington, are you planning to turn your diner into a biker-friendly place? I'm planning to keep it what it's always been, she corrected him. A place where anyone can get a decent meal and be treated with respect. If that appeals to bikers, they're welcome here. As Frank and the last of his brothers and sisters prepared to leave, he hugged Elaine warmly. What you did for me that night, standing up to those cops, it meant something. In a world where people like us are often judged before we speak a word, you saw a person, not a patch. And in return, you brought me a community when I needed it most, Elaine replied, watching as the long line of motorcycles roared to life and headed back to the highway, a promise of return hanging in the morning air. 6 months passed since the night when 200 bikers showed up at Elaine's place. The small roadside diner had changed in ways no one in Bedford could have predicted. What started as a tense standoff with town officials had turned into something new and unexpected, a meeting place where different worlds collided and found common ground. Elaine had used her savings to buy the empty lot next to the diner. With help from Frank and his Hells Angels connections, she added a large outdoor seating area with fire pits for cold nights. A small section of the lot was paved to provide proper parking for motorcycles, complete with a basic maintenance station where riders could check their bikes. Inside, the walls of the diner now featured photos of bikers alongside pictures of local families. A bulletin board near the entrance was covered with business cards, notes, and flyers, connecting travelers with local services and vice versa. Bedford residents offered rooms for rent, repair services, and odd jobs, while travelers left messages about rides available or items for sale. It was a Tuesday morning when Frank returned, this time alone. Elaine was teaching Donna how to make her special apple pie when she heard the familiar rumble of a motorcycle pulling up. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Elaine said with a smile as Frank walked through the door. His beard was neatly trimmed and he wore reading glasses perched on his nose, a look that made him seem more like a college professor than a Hells Angel. Place looks good, Frank said, taking in the expanded diner with approval. Heard business is booming. Can't complain, Elaine replied, pouring him a cup of coffee without being asked. Word spread among the riding community. We get at least a few bikes through every day. Weekends, it's like a small rally. Frank sipped his coffee and nodded. That's actually why I'm here. The club's planning our annual charity ride for children's cancer research. We need a midpoint stop, somewhere the riders can rest, eat, maybe stay overnight. He paused, eyes twinkling. Any ideas? Elaine laughed. I might know a place. How many riders are we talking about? 500, give or take. Clubs from 6 states. The number made Elaine blink, but she didn't hesitate. We'll make it work. When? Last weekend in May. That gives you about 3 months to prepare. They spent the next hour planning, with Frank marking up a map of the area and Elaine making lists of supplies and extra help she would need. They were so focused they didn't notice Mayor Lewis entering until he cleared his throat loudly. Frank's posture changed instantly, a subtle shift that reminded everyone present of the power he carried beneath his casual exterior. But Elaine placed a gentle hand on his arm. Sam, she greeted the mayor with professional courtesy. What brings you to our side of town? The mayor looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Elaine and Frank. Town council meeting today. Wanted to talk to you beforehand. Elaine raised an eyebrow. About? The new tourism initiative. He placed a glossy folder on the counter. Bedford's rebranding itself as a rider-friendly community. Tax breaks for businesses that cater to motorcycle tourism. Special event permits, that sort of thing. Frank kept his face neutral, but Elaine couldn't hide her surprise. That's quite a change from wanting to run bikers out of town. Mayor Lewis had the grace to look embarrassed. Economic data doesn't lie. Since your expansion, tax revenue in this district is up 30%. Hotels report higher occupancy rates. Even the gas station added 2 new employees to handle increased business. He tapped the folder. The council would like you to serve as a community advisor for the initiative. Your insight would be valuable. After the mayor left, Frank's laugh filled the diner. Well, well, looks like Bedford's finally understanding the value of leather-clad tourists with money to spend. Elaine shook her head in wonder. Politics and money, the great equalizers. Speaking of money, Frank said, his tone changing to something more serious. The club wanted me to talk to you about something else. He reached into his vest and pulled out a business proposal. We'd like to invest in your expansion, properly, with contracts and everything. Help you build a small motel behind the diner, maybe 10 rooms. Simple, clean places where riders can crash for the night. Elaine stared at the papers, speechless for a moment. Frank, this would change everything. That's the idea, he said quietly. What you built here, it matters. Not just to me, not just to the club. You created a space where people can come as they are and be treated with respect. That's rare, Elaine. Worth protecting. Worth growing. That night, after closing, Elaine called her son Greg to discuss the proposal. Unlike his mother, Greg had left Bedford for college and never returned, building a life in the city as an accountant. It's solid, Mom, he said, after reviewing the paperwork Frank had left. Actually, it's more than fair. But are you sure about this? Partnering with a motorcycle club is unexpected. Elaine looked around her diner, the place that had been just hers for so long but now felt like it belonged to a wider community. Life's funny that way, baby. Sometimes the people you're taught to fear turn out to be your strongest allies. 3. Months later, on the last weekend in May, Elaine stood on the porch of her diner and watched in amazement as motorcycles filled not just her parking lot, but lined both sides of the highway for nearly a mile. The charity ride had brought riders from across the country, all wearing patches with the names of children they were riding for, kids fighting cancer in hospitals throughout America. Frank found her amid the chaos, his face split with a proud grin. Ready for the next chapter, Elaine? She nodded, thinking about the construction that would begin the following week. 10 simple motel rooms behind the diner, the first of what she hoped would be many. A place where travelers of all kinds could find rest, food, and most importantly, acceptance. You know what's funny? She said as they watched the crowd together. All this started because I refused to judge a man by his patch. Frank nodded, his expression thoughtful. And I refused to judge a woman by the color of her skin. Sometimes the smallest acts of respect change lives in ways we never expect. 1 year had passed since the construction of Elaine's Rest Stop, the 10-room motel behind the diner. What had started as a simple roadside eatery had grown into a landmark known to riders across the country. The small town of Bedford had changed too, embracing its new identity as a biker-friendly community. On a warm Saturday morning, Elaine stood in the kitchen of her diner, now twice its original size. She watched through the window as riders arrived for the annual charity event that had become Bedford's biggest tourism draw. This year's ride expected over 800 participants. Miss Elaine, the first group just arrived from Chicago, Donna called from the front. Donna no longer waited tables. She was now the manager of both the diner and motel, having used her community college business degree to help expand the operation. Start them with coffee, Elaine replied. The breakfast buffet will be ready in 15 minutes. The kitchen door swung open and Greg walked in wearing a Hells Angels vest over his button-up shirt. After helping his mother with the business proposal last year, Greg had surprised everyone by quitting his accounting job and moving back to Bedford. He still handled the finances for Elaine's growing business, but he'd also discovered an unexpected love for motorcycle riding. Mom, you need to come see this, Greg said, excitement in his voice. Frank just pulled up with some special guests. Curious, Elaine wiped her hands on her apron and followed her son outside. The sight that greeted her made her stop in her tracks. Frank stood beside his motorcycle, but he wasn't alone. Next to him was a small group of people Elaine had never expected to see at her diner. Chief Gregory, Mayor Lewis, and several members of the town council, all wearing leather riding vests with a patch that read, Bedford Riders, Community Chapter. Morning. Elaine, Frank called out with a grin. Brought some new recruits for today's ride. Elaine approached, unable to hide her surprise. Well, I never thought I'd see the day. Chief Gregory, whose hair had gone completely gray in the past year, had the good grace to look slightly embarrassed. First time for everything. The police department raised $3,000 for the children's cancer ward at County Hospital. Mayor Lewis stepped forward. Actually, Elaine, we're here on official business too. He gestured to a large wrapped object that 2 council members were carefully removing from a pickup truck. The town council voted unanimously on this, and we thought today would be the perfect day for the presentation. The object was unveiled, revealing a large wooden sign carved with the words, Elaine Washington Highway, in honor of community building and breaking barriers. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth. Sam, what is this? The state approved our request to name the 5-mile stretch of highway that runs through Bedford, the mayor explained. From today forward, it's officially Elaine Washington Highway. We'll be installing the road signs right after the charity ride. Frank stood beside Elaine, his weathered face showing pride. Told you that first night, what you built here matters. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Elaine accepting the honor with tears in her eyes. As the crowd dispersed to prepare for the charity ride, Frank pulled her aside. There's someone else I want you to meet, he said, leading her toward a group of riders who had just arrived. Among them was an elderly woman with silver hair, sitting tall on the back of a motorcycle driven by a younger man. As they got closer, Elaine realized the woman had to be in her 80s at least, but her eyes were bright and alert. Elaine, this is Rose Miller. My mother, Frank said with gentle reverence. The older woman extended a hand. So you're the lady who saw my son as a person, not just a patch. Been wanting to meet you for some time. Elaine took Rose's hand, feeling the strength still present in the older woman's grip. It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Miller. Call me Rose, she insisted. Frank tells me you make the best apple pie east of the Mississippi. I brought my secret recipe to compare notes. For the next hour, Elaine and Rose sat at a corner table, exchanging recipe secrets and life stories while around them, the diner filled with bikers and locals preparing for the day's big event. They were from different worlds, different generations, different races, but in that moment, they were simply 2 women who understood the value of seeing beyond surfaces. By midday, the charity ride was ready to begin. 800 motorcycles, lined up along Elaine Washington Highway, with Frank and Elaine at the lead. Chief Gregory and his Bedford Riders group took position of honor near the front, many of them first-time participants. As Elaine climbed onto the back of Frank's motorcycle, she looked back at what she had built. The diner's sign glowed in the sunlight. The motel was fully booked. The parking lot was filled with people from all walks of life, united by a common cause. Ready? Frank asked over his shoulder. Born ready, Elaine replied, securing her helmet. As they pulled out onto the highway that now bore her name, Elaine reflected on how a single moment of kindness had transformed not just her life, but an entire community. One rainy night, she had chosen to see a person in need rather than a stereotype. That choice had rippled outward, breaking down barriers that had stood for generations. The roar of 800 engines filled the air as the procession began moving down the highway. From her position at the front, Elaine could see the road, stretching out before them, a symbol of the journey still ahead. There would always be more barriers to break, more bridges to build, but for now, riding with the wind on her face and surrounded by a community that had formed against all odds, Elaine Washington knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to judge a book by its cover, or a biker by his patch. As the charity ride passed the Welcome to Bedford sign, now proudly declaring it a rider-friendly community, Elaine smiled and held on tight. The future, like the open road ahead, was full of possibilities.